So I'm just going to count us in. Ethan, thanks so much for joining me today. I'm Vinny O'Brien. I'm with the RMW Commerce team, living in Ireland, but based out of New York in virtual terms. But Ethan, maybe tell us a little bit about you, Groove Commerce, and where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Ethan Giffin, CEO of Groove Commerce. I'm 50 years old. I'm a Virgo, based in Baltimore, Maryland. Joking, of course, but no, I am. I'm CEO of Groove Commerce, and we help mid-market companies and manufacturers and distributors that want to go online and sell from a B2B point of view. And so we do that both with the creation of buyer portals. We also do that with direct-to-consumer channels as people continue to want to dip their toes into that. And then we also follow that up with full life cycle marketing once the projects are completed.
So how does a Virgo get on in Baltimore these days? That's going to be my closing question to you. But we'll save that till we get a little bit further in the conversation.
It's funny. Virgos are an interesting breed. You find that many CEOs or company owners are Virgos. God bless my wife and all the other folks that have to live at home with a Virgo. We're opinionated. We get frustrated easily. We hold grudges. It's all of the above. But Baltimore is a fantastic place to live. We actually just kicked things off with opening day for baseball season, which is always a fun time in our city.
So is that the dominant sport?
Actually, we've got two. We have Baltimore Ravens football, which is we continue to play and perform well. I actually worked for the former owner before creating Groove for 9 years. And then it's funny, it comes around to baseball very quickly then in the spring. We did have some overlap where the Ravens won the Super Bowl, and Baltimore Orioles actually made it pretty far into the playoffs in baseball. And I felt like my staff didn't work like for a year between those two events happening.
And nobody cares. Like that's okay in my book.
That's true. It's true.
We always figure if Ireland ever gets to like a final of a World Cup or something, that the country's just going to shut down for a year. But we're okay with that. That's what the rainy day thing is for, right?
That is true. Yeah. In fact, I actually am very clear with my staff. Our staff is spread out all over the country at this point. But, for our core Baltimore staff, I always tell them, listen, if you're going to go to opening day, just be honest and say, I'm going to opening day. It's okay. I'm going to go too. I don't want to see you like calling in sick with the flu and then 3 Miller Lights deep at the bar at Pickles Pub, which is a famous bar that's right across the street from the stadium. So yeah, it's kind of a holiday for us, especially, and when the Ravens won the Super Bowl, we closed down the office because I thought there's no expectation of anybody coming into work today.
That's amazing.
On the day after the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I love those hangover Mondays that people have been leaning on. I wonder, is it a generational thing? I'd love to look back in 10 years from now and see, do Gen Z do it differently? I hope they don't. I hope there's some sort of tradition kept in here. But look, you've kind of touched on a few things that Groove do, and I always find it interesting being in that space as well. That you sound like you're full service, right? So your mind has got to be gone so many different ways at any one point in time. So being able to get you to talk about something really specific like we'd like to get into today, I think is going to be really interesting for us. But just tell us a little bit about the evolution of Groove and maybe how you've got to where you are today, sports aside.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting journey. We're going to turn we'll be turning 18 years old on May 2nd, so we'll be legal at that point. And it's been a very, very interesting journey for me. When I started out, I thought, man, we're going to go out and build $5,000 e-commerce websites for folks. That was kind of my dream. And then we're going to figure out how to market them, for $1,000 a month after. And so like, oh my, how far we've come from that. But when I started the company, I really thought about a lot. I had 3 legs of this. I had creative, I had technology development, and I had the marketing aspect. And when I was on the client side prior to founding Groove, I was in charge of a pretty big website project that was a national job board for an international staffing company. And I had all different types of firms that worked together. I had a dev firm, I had a branding firm, I had an SEO firm, I had a media buying firm. and they all kind of hated each other. And so, the dev firm would think the SEO firm is full of shit, like kind of things and stuff. And so I'd always have to kind of play mediator in all of that. Or I'd always really have to like double down and push harder on parts of, the development to make sure that it was SEO friendly. And so that's been kind of the three tenets of how we've operated the last 18 years. And so we get customers both that come in on the project or replatforming side, where we'll take them on the journey of replatforming. We started out, in the world of a platform called ASP.NET Storefront, which was an old classic ASP platform. We moved on from Magento and gained some traction nationally there. And then we were off to the races. So they either come in on the replatforming side, or they come in on the marketing side, and we'll put them through the paces in terms of our lifecycle and retention marketing programs. And then eventually we'll have to build them a new slate because what they have may not be up to snuff.
Yeah, all these things are intertwined. And I think on the client side, as much as internally where you're fighting about who's full of shit, clients typically think like there's some sort of dark art here. But it's just a breadth of things that you need to know at any one time, how to connect the dots. It's just so vast and it's ever changing. And there's one side that I've always thought about, and I'm keen to hear your opinion, but the fundamentals haven't really changed, right? So that core base is there. It's just how you juggle quicker, maybe juggle a little bit differently. And I think one of the things, and maybe you can tell me how you feel about this, but the skill that you learn the most is how to simplify the language of business through technology. And I think that's really key when it comes to B2B e-commerce.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I 100% agree. A lot of the tactics like that we do, maybe the steps have changed, the softwares have changed, the software languages have changed, the tools have changed. The concepts of what we kind of do for folks have stayed the same for the last 18 years. And so the more things change, the more they are the same. So it's still about, from an SEO standpoint, making sure that the code is clean, it loads fast, there isn't extra stuff in the code that confuses Google and the other search engines. And while people are saying things like SEO is dead, I would say that we're going into the next evolution of that, because ChatGPT, we've actually had prospects load their RFP or their list of requirements into ChatGPT and say, hey, can you give me a list of e-commerce agencies that we should talk to? And one of those is a $500,000 deal that we're currently in the pipeline with. So it's a very interesting process of how no matter what changes, it all stays the same. One of the things in terms of B2B that I really feel strongly about is people will go on these kind of death march projects that are 8 to 12 months long or even longer, and then they kind of run out of steam at the end, and they're not like thinking about what comes next after I've built my buyer portal. But that's when like kind of the next phase of the journey should actually begin, because you've got all of these customers that you've spent a lot of time like importing them into the new system. You spent a lot of time kind of normalizing the data for their orders to get it to fit in this other platform, this new platform, and then you do nothing with it. So, we've really been focused a lot on building core metrics, around B2B that people can start to think about and leverage. And it's something new that many people just aren't talking about.
So there's a couple of things there that I'm not going to say the word unpack because everyone says it. I'm trying to think of a better way to say unpack, but there you go. I've done it now. But a couple of things I want to jump on, because first it's the idea of time. I think time is linked to accounting periods, which typically kills a project before they start. And that's both on the marketing side and on the development side. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I'm going to come back to it, but you kind of touched on a few things as well. Now, the types of investment that are coming through in B2B are slightly different. And I don't want to put the cart before the horse here, but then the type of projects that are emerging for me, and this is a fundamental B2B and B2C difference, is that you're trying to solve a business problem first. Whereas in B2C, we at least like to tell ourselves that we're solving for a customer. But in B2B, it's like we got this legacy CDP we want to get rid of, or we've got an ERP platform that we got to take out. that's where it starts. And then the journey, as you said, it really begins once you've that first piece of the project done, but it's rarely the start or the end point. So I suppose, do you see that as the entry point for most people? And how do you recognize when you've reached that point? And then I'd love you to kind of move into your opinion on whether or not time factor is a real thing here, because I think time and accountancy periods have screwed so many D2C projects and performance marketing. And that's maybe a whole other conversation, but that's my opinion, but I'm here to hear yours.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot in what you just asked me. So time is a killer of things, and it is challenging, right? Because there are a lot of moving parts in these projects. The ERP, maybe there's a PIM, there's a CRM. Do you have a data warehouse? Do you have a data lake? Is there, some type of CDP, as you mentioned? And it's just a process to kind of get all of those pieces together. And many times you're still dealing with, there's a lot of manufacturers and distributors that are still multi generational. And so when you're having conversations with those folks, sometimes there are people within, a family tree that kind of report to each other and kind of run those organizations. And there's a lot of 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old type firms out there like that, that are still very family driven. They're not super tech savvy. They're not very mature with their thought process. They have somebody internally that's an advocate. Maybe it's the next generation kind of coming up. Maybe it's, someone they've hired. But these can be challenging projects to get all of the parts of it, aligned together.
I just want to jump in there, because I think when we spoke before, Ethan, you described that as institutional knowledge, and it really struck a chord with me that you've got this second and third generation family businesses, and the choices are either a family member keeps a legacy going, or you sell the business and you retire off onto wherever it's going to be, Cancun or something. Maybe that's the entry point for where money is starting to creep in, because the next generation are saying, well, why do I need to use my money to do this? I can leverage other people's, and we've got a solid asset base here. And, whether that's dressed up in property or whatever those assets might be, there feels like there's more to work with. But I think there's some of the choices that people are now making. Am I using my own money, or am I going to use third-party cash to try and drive this change through the business?
Well, that's been a big part of even the last 24 months or so, with the interest rates going up. And so, when money was inexpensive to borrow, lines of credit were much cheaper, like, it slowed down the sales process, I feel like, on our side pretty significantly, as people are evaluating, these projects. And so then they're thinking about, do I just sell this things? We're seeing businesses and folks even just say, I think Mark Cuban recently, he sold the Dallas Mavericks, basketball team. And he said, I didn't want the next generation to have to deal with this business and figure out what to do with it when I'm no longer around. And I think we're seeing more and more of that, especially as, we're kind of skipping over generations, or there isn't a next generation that wants to get involved and kind of saw the grind, of their parents and grandparents, and don't necessarily want to continue that. And so that's where we're seeing, private equity and other things start to get involved with these businesses. I know we saw it first with services, cash flowing services businesses that, are regional powerhouses. And now I think we're seeing it with manufacturing and distribution as well.
And why do you think it's becoming so attractive? And I know, as you said there, that interest rates have come up. Why is manufacturing all of a sudden more interesting than being on the cold face of customer acquisition?
Well, I just think that people are running out of steam in some ways, right? I think if you're looking, and not to speak ill of folks, of manufacturers that have made these decisions, but sometimes the patriarch or the matriarch of the family still operates the business, and they're in their 70s, and they haven't done enough to bring that next generation up, and they haven't planned the right way. I've interestingly also seen firsthand some of folks that are involved in multi-generational family businesses where the parent never gives up control, and that next generation works their best earning years in their kind of 40s and 50s. Wow. And ultimately, the dad is never happy with them. And so I think, I think that's a part of it as well, and causes people to just want to, get the hell away from this emotional thing that we've done. And so I think there's a lot of different reasons for people kind of wanting to move on. I think it's maybe they've taken it as far as they've gone. They want to create some multi-generational wealth, right?
Mhm.
Like it's on the back end. And, once you can start getting 30, 40, $50 million, for a business, like you've started to create a multi-generational wealth where living off the interest, is a
Yeah.
reality. And sometimes, I've seen folks where there isn't somebody to kind of give it or there's no interest from that next generation to do that. And so, and then, that succession planning, I think is a big part of it.
I, I want to come back to that specific to Groove, because there's probably a change in mindset that you guys need to go through as well. And especially that you've been around so long, because you almost need to rewire your thinking on it. And I think even from that perspective, it becomes a challenge for you, because you've got to rewire how the business operates, and you've got to continuously do it. But I just want to go back to the B2B side for a second, because within those conversations, the thing that strikes me as well within the B2B industries, and particularly in all the niches that we're in, is that they operate in much smaller circles. So there's a lot more certainty around supply chain, who your customers are, what percentage of business they give you annually, how are you going to treat them at the end of the year when it comes to gifting and rebates and all these other areas that become so fundamental to understanding how to design better solutions for people. But can you tell me a little bit about the intimacy of the B2B supply chain, because it's more about people than the B2C side of things.
It definitely is. I think that it is about the people involved. These are companies with deep institutional knowledge. They generally are kind of doing things the same ways over and over again. We're still seeing people that have significant manual processes within the businesses for placing orders. We still see businesses that have multiple fax machines kind of operating and sitting in a corner waiting for like orders to come in. And so, I think that it is an area where there's a real opportunity for some disruption and growth for those companies that want to like push forward, overall.
And I think, is the word disruption a dirty word in the industry, Ethan, or do you find that it's welcomed?
I really, like for me, like I think transformation is probably the
Yeah.
the TED Talk word that I should use, for that. And I don't think it's a dirty word, quite frankly. I think in even just in the Baltimore area, we've seen companies, 100-year-old companies go out of business. And so, quite frankly, we had a longtime customer that was 100-year-old business that there was no next generation, and the owner was in his late 70s. He hadn't done any succession planning. There was a trust set up to kind of, at least there was a trust set up to kind of operate things like post him no longer being here.
Yeah.
But I actually tried. It was such a great customer of ours. I actually tried to acquire it,
Okay.
and was unsuccessful. And they ultimately went out of business 6 months later.
Oh my God.
And all of that staff and all of that history of
Yeah.
100-year-old Baltimore, Maryland company was just gone. And they
Wow.
were doing about 20 couple million in revenue. And I think could have lived on for another 30 years easily.
Wow. Yeah, it's sad to see things like that, because in more regionalized parts of the country, they're the lifeblood of states and cities all around the place. And when these stories don't get told, we forget why we should be saving businesses like this, or working harder to keep them going, I guess. And all this talk of Succession, you actually got me thinking of Succession, the TV show. where's Logan Roy and all this? He'd know what to do. And then you got the battle between Kendall and his brother, and they're looking to take over and split the business into digital and traditional. And it's a great kind of analogy, at least in my head, playing out for how the different scenarios can play if there's not cohesion in terms of thinking. So as part of your discovery and journey, you must have to spend a lot of time figuring out how you develop that cultural mindset, I guess, for transformation, or do you have to work really hard to get to that?
I think you have to be mindful of it. From my point of view, there's take a $75 million, 60 person, 40 or 50-year-old manufacturer that's still family owned. That's a great business. They've made sure that it's set up and it cash flows to support the family needs. And, they take care of their folks. They do what they can every holiday. They take care of, their vendors and the people that help them. But you've got to feel that you can be successful with the project, in order to take it on. And that's a big thing for us. If we don't feel like, there's enough overall buy-in, it's not worth it to me to do that, to take that project on. At the same time, I often become kind of a confidant in that process of, hey, what should we be doing here? What are we thinking about? Or can you talk to the staff? How do we make sure our salespeople don't feel like we're stepping on their toes? Can you come to our annual, maybe they have an annual meeting, and can you come to our meeting and be visible? All of those are things that, when you're working with businesses like that, the human touch and the handshake are still very important.
Yeah, I grew up in a rural part of Ireland. I worked in a butcher's when I was 13 years of age, and it was third generation at that stage. It was founded in 1886. So you kind of get a sense of the importance of all these human aspects as you describe. And as you were talking about it, it brought me right back to my first illegal job as a 13-year-old in Ireland, working in a butcher's shop, handling cash, but being taught about the importance of being human first and everything else second. But I've seen that business develop now and take through technology. And, I still get text messages from them with their weekly specials. And that to them is a breakthrough in technology. But I think it's a good analogy for the idea that the way we've deployed D2C technology is that everyone needs everything all the time. B2B feels very much more like you design your own version of what digital commerce or e-commerce looks like for your business. So in your discovery process, how far along down the line do you get with them, and what is that kind of that first committed stage that most people end up on?
Yeah, I mean, I think from my point of view, when you get into these projects, one of the things that I really hate is businesses that have signs everywhere. Don't sit here, don't do that, don't do this, right? Kind of like going back to Seinfeld and the Soup Nazi, right? And there are many kind of businesses that are jaded, and they have, 40 or 50 years of business rules that they kind of follow, some of which are detrimental to their own success. And so, we start thinking about those and asking about those, and really kind of pushing buttons, within that in the discovery process, because those can kill companies and kill projects. Like we had a client that was more focused on collecting sales tax in hypothetical situations than they were of actually generating new business and sales. Exactly. And ultimately they went out of business as well, after 40 years in business, because the owner was in his 80s. And so you want to be mindful of like, hey, let's not over customize this thing so much with such specific business rules that it's not upgradable, or it just creates too much friction in the sales process. And so, you've got to be mindful of that. Like when you're doing that transformation of, hey, like you've got to learn to say no and push back in this. And you've got to do that respectfully. But that's part of this discovery process, is kind of understanding. If somebody doesn't have an ERP system, we generally won't work with you. We need you to be at least kind of that next step, in that process to be able to to have that, because getting that catalog
Yeah.
is like one of the most challenging parts. We see kind of the catalog optimization and the handshake with the ERP
Yeah.
are generally the most complicated aspects of these projects.
So you've kind of challenged a piece of my thinking, which I hadn't considered as much in the catalog management. But while I've been talking to other people in this space, some people have said ERP is not necessary for B2B. Now, you don't have to shoot me yet, but let me finish. They also said that when you talk to B2B manufacturing companies, they don't think about commerce platforms in the way that they can, which is I could actually run my ERP through my commerce platform because they have advanced so much in terms of technology now. Do you think that's a fair statement, or is it misguided from my side?
I don't know. I'm hard pressed to think that maybe on the lower end of organizations, right? Like, so our ICP is 50 to 500 million in terms of size. And I'm hard pressed to think, that people are running $50 million businesses out of QuickBooks, like still without some level of, digitization, digital transformation within, at least the financial aspect of the organization. Usually they've got a CFO or somebody that's like at least pushing that. And that's how we kind of want to like our mindset with these projects is you never see an ERP project actually be underfunded. They'll spend $1 million on an ERP project and want to spend 50,000 on the website. Yeah. And so we're trying to really push that kind of CFO mindset about these B2B projects because so that they're properly funded and properly respected within the organization.
Interesting, because on the B2C side, at least on within our organization, we see the CFO now as being so well versed on marketing that they can make these decisions a lot quicker on the B2C
absolutely.
side. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. If they are a direct to consumer organization, absolutely. Like the CFOs are getting much more like knowledgeable, like want to be a part of the process as they should be, and are asking like much more strategic questions, in that. But I'm talking about kind of a 50-year-old, $100 million manufacturer where, the CFO may be the only non-family member that's in leadership.
Tom Hagen comes to mind from the Godfather. A lot of old school references here from my side. I'm going to try and bring it forward again then, because there is investment coming through now, and we touched a little bit on private equity here and in previous discussions that we've had. I want to explore a little bit and see how healthy it is for the industry, because it hasn't always worked on the direct to consumer side. There's so many horror stories about aggregators and just private equity in general, where it's accelerated businesses in the wrong way and at the wrong time and with the wrong people. What's the cautionary tale you think we can take from the direct to consumer side into B2B?
It's a challenge. It's a challenge because I would say, I'm hard pressed to think about all of the PE firms that we've worked with or been a part of in terms of those conversations. And I would say 8 or 9 out of 10 of them have made the wrong decisions. Either they've been short-sighted in terms of looking for an immediate payback on something, or they've cheapened the quality of the product to save money. Case in point, I was talking with somebody that, their favorite brand got acquired by PE, and the quality of the sweatshirts went from super thick and very, comfortable and cozy down to very thin, and cheap and, looking like ragged after 2 or 3 washes.
Oh, wow.
And so, that's a real challenge of like, it would suck to have this legacy of this multi-generational company like just evaporate, within 5 years of acquisition because of really like poor decision making, by the private equity folks. And we've been on both sides of this. We have, we do work like with portfolio companies that have multiple companies in the portfolio, some of which are very investment minded and, have a little bit longer tail thought about, how to build this and gain quality from it. We've also been on the other end where, PE came in and acquired one of our customers like wrapped it up with others, and kind of we were on the outside as the agency because they already had somebody they worked with, but that agency wasn't knowledgeable about commerce at all, and saw their sales drop by 50%, because of bad decision making and lack of knowledge around how the platforms work and how how shopping engines work and those types of things.
And how do you get down the road of educating PE firms, or do you want to be in that space, Ethan? Or
I mean, can you really educate a PE firm? I will say that as a Virgo, I get in trouble at times for kind of saying what I think. And I will, I would rather speak my mind than be quiet and just kind of, let it go. So that's generally how we work. And it's, of course we've gotten fired from folks because of that. But at the same time, we have had people that have said, hey, show me the business case here. And, and I'll be like, we'll do the research and put the time in to present this to you and show you like why this is a poor decision. And, we have had success, by doing that.
One of the things I could see is attractive from an investment point of view, PE otherwise, is really good B2B firms. And one I've worked with over here, they're in the manufacturing space for safety gear for like frontline services, firemen, firewomen, that kind of thing. And not one of their customers is responsible for more than 1% of their revenue across the business. And it's been a barometer they've had for a long time. I think that kind of careful customer management is something that B2B has way stronger than direct to consumer. And I don't always want to be comparing the two, but I think it's a basis for comparison when we think about both industries. But that intrinsic knowledge of customer is a real advantage I find in the B2B world, particularly manufacturing and kind of really complicated industries, because knowing that customer requirement is just so key. Do you find that that's a really good vantage point within your customer base or prospects?
Yeah, I do. I do think kind of knowing your customer and having I think that is a strong opportunity, for them.
Do you feel that they know it better? I suppose that's probably my broader question here. Do you think that these industries, because they're more human based, have a better understanding of who that customer is?
I think they do, but I also just think they kind of are short-sighted in some ways with it. I had people will build these projects and then kind of run out of steam, as I mentioned, and they won't even take the time to set up abandoned cart, other automations and flows. They won't set up any analytics or tracking. And so, I had a COO kind of challenge me that said, well, we don't need this abandoned cart because we would have gotten those orders anyway. And I kind of challenge that thought process and very much disagree, because one thing that I do know is that B2B customers are being educated by Amazon and other direct-to-consumer brands that they purchase from. And they're looking to have similar user experiences and not some convoluted Frankensteinian kind of shit UI UX thing that people throw up, on a B2B standpoint at times. And so they're looking for a great interface. They're looking for no friction in the checkout process. They're looking for all the things that that retailers like Amazon are doing. They're looking for, real-time stock, understanding of when things ship and go out, and all of that. And so, I think the days of, like, from my point of view, the days of just taking the starter theme that comes with a platform and slapping their logo in it and maybe changing a color or two are over. At least from our point of view as an agency, we don't want to do those types of projects.
Two things there. We've coined the phrase Frankensteinian. We're gonna copyright that with you just after the show. But it's a good description, I think. There's something in what you said that I'd love to explore a little bit, which is about accountability. There are times I feel in the resistance factor where there's so much accountability that now can be applied because of commerce platforms that people resist the levels of accountability you can provide in terms of analytics and tracking and showing where things drop off. How do you solve for that balance of still allowing John in accounts or John in sales to do his job and work with the people you like to work with, and providing the fact that 70% of what John does doesn't work?
It's a challenge. I mean, it's a real challenge. And so I think there are organizations that are looking to go to that next level of transformation, and they're willing to push those buttons, even if it means kind of long-term folks maybe turning over. And I think there's still folks that just would rather keep the status quo, with that, because people are pushing, that away.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer of like you can't like make decisions on what you don't track, and
Mm.
I've yet to see an organization that's fully, maxed out their addressable market. And are there opportunities to find other markets that their products may, similar markets that they are unaware of that their products might work for? And so,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm just, and so, we learn pretty quickly, the type of, what the CEO or the direct VP of sales or the director of marketing are looking for when doing these projects.
So culturally, one of the points you made earlier, your ability to understand the culture of an organization is probably one of those things that you can't put down on paper, but your team needs in abundance to be able to decide how to guide a conversation. It's got to be a key lever that you guys have developed over 18 years of doing this kind of development. Would you say that's a fair comment?
Yeah. Yeah. Because we don't want to work with jerks either internally or as customers. Like, I'm only on this earth for a certain amount of time, and it's just not worth it to me to like, I will find the people that want to digitally transform and are looking for somebody to kind of guide them on that journey.
So as we kind of look forward, or kind of look from this point out, it feels like a lot of back end B2B commerce is being solved. Some of the UX and UI that you kind of talked about, there's not as much requirement for you to design better UX in the way we would think about it direct to consumer, or is there almost like an ethical obligation on you and your team to provide better UX for the B2B customers that are coming in, because they just don't have that frame of
Yeah.
reference?
Yeah, and they may not be mature enough in their knowledge to even know to ask for that. And so, we think accessibility is important. We think load speed is important. We think, like getting rid of friction is important. And so I do think there's a lot of room for innovation. You've got people that have like parts diagrams and flyouts. You've got people with custom products. You've got people that want to have bulk order forms. You've got people that have, complex customization rules, coming out of CPQ modules, like Tacton that they want to, put out into the interface. And so, all of that is very important to be well thought out and think about.
So it kind of leads me to my next part of my thinking. So again, in the direct comparison and the D2C land, we've had this kind of, let's call it a problem of 97% is what I call it. It's that like conversion rates have been around 3% for 20 years, as long as you and I have been in commerce, and nothing has changed. Like, it's still, we still arrive at this point that it's a good year if you can hold the 3%
Right.
or a little bit above it, right? So we haven't changed, but the people in the industry are still you and I who've been here for 20 years. How do you make room for this next generation of talent coming through, and how do you allow them to use tools that are available today, like AI, and how can they design solutions differently, do you think, to get different outcomes? What's the space that they can play in, given that we have such a traditional backdrop to B2B commerce?
Yeah, I think the tools have gotten infinitely better. Okay. I think the tools have gotten infinitely better in terms of the cloud-based tools that you can plug in to a commerce store for visualization, product discovery, merchandising. Somebody can put together an Amazon level store by, having a framework of apps and tools that go into that. I think the design tools and platforms have gotten significantly better than when I started with like Photoshop 2 and Illustrator. You tools like prototyping tools and Figma, things like Figma have the ability to create these kind of clickable prototypes that ultimately become the high res designs that get built. And so, I think that there is an opportunity for that next generation of folks to work. One of the things, though, that is interesting is that all of this kind of started, all of this talk about conversion kind of came out of the direct response marketing world, right? People sending letters and postcards to your home in the 40s and 50s and 60s, right? Like, and so I think that getting the more things change, the more things stay the same. So I think it's also important for the next generation to kind of push technology and tools. But I think it's important for kind of my generation to push the domain knowledge of the direct response marketing and what it used to be like when we could only do billboards and postcards, or when Google when Google didn't even exist, and you were buying Overture clicks for a penny a click that showed up on yahoo.com. And so, like, that kind of institutional knowledge is important to kind of push down. Some of my younger folks that work for me are much better at AI and other tools, than I am. And I'm really kind of pushing myself to continue to learn and evolve and leverage those tools as well, though. But they're reacting in a different way. It's also really intriguing to see how folks, thinking about, photo and video, and you're seeing, younger folks, like even teenagers, with the muscle memory to be able to hold a phone and shoot a picture. Even my 7-year-old can shoot a video and is starting to kind of have fun with that. And it's intriguing to see how he, emulates what he sees, and then the ability to create something like, they're not going to show it at the Cinemark theater. They're like, it's kind of fun to look at.
Yeah, they're not inhibited by legacy or the things that have gone before them. And that's in part why I asked it, because I think the next challenge in the B2B side of things, which you guys cover off at Groove, is around marketing. And you've kind of mentioned a bit of direct response as well. It seems like once you're solving the technology challenge, you've got to be able to think through that marketing journey as well. And it must be great to have that skill set under one roof, because you don't have to talk about future proofing 2 years after delivering the first solution. It's kind of embedded in your thinking around the architecture that's there. How far is marketing now influencing the overall architecture design, or is it getting to that? Has it matured enough yet to have that influence?
Well, I think it's an interesting time especially for B2B. Like my mindset is I want to apply my learnings from direct to consumer to B2B and figure out how to make that work. What is the nuance of it, right? And so I do think that win back campaigns and abandoned cart, and thinking about RFM and segmenting your customers, like trying to move them between the swim lanes is a key part of how we think differently, about this. And I'm sharing this probably for a group of my peers, which I probably shouldn't, but by the way, I don't like any of you if you're watching this. And so
just for consistency.
And so it's definitely a part of what we're thinking about. We also see people go in these kind of crazy, somebody will get really want to do some big kind of CDP or a data warehouse project, and it's like, we've yet to see that investment really turn into anything unless the company has significant digital maturity and a significant internal team to take advantage of those types of things.
I think what's interesting is that you've probably got more time in generational businesses to work on that marketing side of things. I mean, if you can migrate a business, start the transformation project, and not impact negatively what's going on from a revenue perspective, it's a really good starting point. And then you can grow into some of the other marketing streams as well, which I think is really interesting. A couple of other areas that are emerging here, and I don't want to take too much more of your time, Ethan, or maybe we'll do a follow-on session because there's just so many things we want to go through. And from a marketing perspective, if you're willing to do a separate session on it, maybe we get back on and do a recording. But in certain industries, maybe where there's heavy regulation or compliance required, it's creating new challenges for you, I'd imagine, as an organization to come up with solutions and platform selections that mean you can deliver what's required. And I've talked to people in firearms and tobacco and CBD products. And have you encountered some of these kind of challenges?
It's been, we definitely have, like, over the last 18 years, and it's, folks that have, internal compliance teams that need to review every piece of every period that, is or in every feature of a website. You've got the kind of Prop 65 California stuff that we need to deal with. And quite honestly, one of the biggest conversations that I've been having outside of compliance, but is kind of these tariffs that have kind of been driven in the news. And our customers, like, I've had a half dozen conversations, over the last 4 or 5 weeks about, hey, is it possible to use, like, the handling field within the platform to change the label of that and call that the kind of tariff, and maybe some of our more politically leaning companies might even say the Trump tariff, to kind of show that, hey, the reason why this product has gone from $49.99 to $69.99 is specifically because of the tariff. And so we're actively having those conversations as well. But it's been a part of what we think about. Sometimes it's easy to accommodate, and sometimes it's more challenging.
Two things there. You're going to have to not buy French champagne anymore, Ethan. You're just going to have to get a new Vice.
Listen, I love French champagne and pocket squares, and I have a French car, and so
there you go.
It's these are interesting times, especially for our customers that have products on the water currently that have already been contracted and signed for, and, like, trying to figure out, how it's going to affect their businesses.
Yeah, I think there's not going to be too much movement there for some time. But one of the things that gives me hope, I guess, in all of that is kind of how you describe the use of fields that are already there. We've probably come through that world of workarounds in the early 2000s where you were able to figure things out on the fly. And I think that ability and that kind of way to handle ambiguity is something that our industry does have in abundance and can figure things out without kind of going to push the doomsday button straight away. And I think that's something we have in our favor. Look, I'm conscious of your time and mine. If you're happy to pick this up again and we do a second part, maybe early next week, you and I can pick it up right where we left off, get into more of the marketing, because I'd love to talk to you about RFM marketing and leave people with some of the understandings of the basic sensibilities they can do, some of the more advanced marketing, and hear how a Virgo would tell people not to market as well, because there's a lot of stuff that we do that's absolutely terrible.
No, I listen, I always appreciate, I never want to be on the wrong side of Rick's ear. So, I want to make sure that, whatever I can do to support, I'm happy to regroup on this.
Well, thankfully he's got two of those ears, and we'll bring him along for the next discussion and get him involved in the marketing, because I know, look, this is something that is hot on his radar right now. So look, let's pick it up early next week, and we'll continue the conversation.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much.
Amazing. I'm going to end the recording now, and I'll